What were the most freeing elements of doing that? But also, what were the most pain in the ass elements? Like the point where you're like, oh, why am I doing this?
What I realized as I continued this is that most things I was doing, I was going against the grain of society, which meant each day it was work to accomplish these basic things. And once you make that change, it's not like the change is set in stone. You have to actually actively continue that change because society is trying to suck you back. And the tool that I came up with, and I don't remember where this came from, if someone shared it with me or I just popped into my head, was that every action that I would take, instead of asking consciously or subconsciously, what are people going to think about me? I asked, is this beneficial to the earth, my community, and myself? And that was my new lens of looking at the world. And that was a really helpful way for me to let go. And really, people ask me what my biggest advice to children would be, but I guess this probably would be my biggest advice to everyone, which is let go of what other people are thinking. That's one of the most freeing things you can possibly do to allow you to really live the life that you truly want to.
I think everyone sort of intellectually understands that. I need to care less what others think about me. But in sort of the day-to-day, it's not always easy. But it takes action. You have to start doing things that prove to you that, like, oh, maybe this doesn't matter what these people think. So what did you learn along that path?
Everything that you want to be successful at requires work. So some people might pursue a musical instrument or, a sport or an intellectual subject. To live sustainably requires practice and diligence in the same way as any of those. And so what I would do is I would create these practices that were specifically designed to help me to break free from what people would think. For example, way back at the beginning, I set myself a challenge of 1 week where I could only eat with my hands, no matter where I was, restaurant, party. And, in most of white Western society, to eat with your hands, they're going to think of you as low. So I would do these things where people would think of me as low and just get used to people thinking of me as low. I started to dumpster dive, eating from the garbage. And so just, the more and more people that thought less of me, actually the more helpful that was, because it just became something that I became used to. In 2016, when I did the month of living like the average person, but having to wear every single piece of trash while living in New York City.
Yeah, so just for context for people, yes. Any trash that you produced, you had this full body suit that had like these big clear sleeves, more or less, and you would put that piece of trash in the sleeves and just walk around in this trash suit. And of course, slowly, the longer you live, the more the trash is accumulating. But yeah, go on.
Yes, perfect explanation. And so the average US American creates 4.5 pounds of trash per day. If I consume like the average person, that's 135 pounds a month. Anybody listening to this knows it's hard to walk around with 135 pounds on your body. So I had to wear it everywhere that I went. And so talk about, I'm literally walking around the streets covered in garbage. So you got to have some, strength to do that, mental strength to do that.
And physical strength, by the way.
Yes. So what I did, I was really concerned at the beginning of going outside, especially when the suit was kind of empty, because it's not even a good visual at the beginning. So I ended up getting so fortunate to watch the film, The Big Short.
Yeah.
Which is the one about the 2008, 2009 housing market crash where millions of US Americans saw their financial wealth just dissolve.
Right.
And I was reminded that we're living in this grand delusion, that the majority of us are existing in a grand delusion with almost everything we're doing. And I thought to myself, all right, if I'm walking around on the streets just surrounded by people living in a delusion, then why does it matter what they think about me? We're all delusional anyway.
Can you unpack the delusion part more that the average person lives in? Because I think if I'm a listener hearing this, I'm like, who's this guy to tell me that I'm living a deluded life? At the same time, I will say, you kind of mentioned, I was in my own delusion too. So we'll give you points there.
The way our societal norms are set up is under the belief that we can create things that are permanent. All of our buildings, all of our structures are all designed in a way where, this is just going to last. But the reality is that we live in a very impermanent society. So San Francisco right now, after existing for a very short period of time in seemingly permanent way, is literally sinking. And within a couple generations, they might crumble to the ground. But we don't acknowledge that. We design our entire structures around that not being true. And the same goes with all of our consumerism. We live on what Carl Sagan calls a pale blue dot. But we act like we live in this infinite place where we can consume, exploit, and extract endlessly. And we pretty much seem to think that this will continue. But the reality is, if you look at it pretty objectively, the most likely scenario is we're going to destroy ourselves through our own delusion of the infiniteness of our resources.
So tell us about your experiment of non-ownership. What prompted that, and what did you start to do, and what was that like?
Okay, so if anybody was not yet convinced that I have gone insane, this may be your opportunity to think that.
Let's go. This is what we need.
So I talk about delusion. I think ownership is an illusion. I don't believe we can own the land. The earth doesn't sign that contract. The plants and animals don't sign that contract. And most of the humans don't sign those contracts when we decide that we own the land. Just a couple of people with the most privilege and access say, yeah, we now are the owners of this. So I've been on a long journey of simplifying and downsizing, physically, mentally, in every way that I can be doing that. And years back, I got my life down to 111 possessions. And then later I got it to 44 possessions. I've always dreamed of this idea of getting to the place of owning absolutely nothing, not a single material possession, not even clothes or a computer or money or any of that. It was last year I walked from Canada to Los Angeles. I simplified my life to everything I own fitting in a backpack. I walked 6 months from Canada to LA, letting go, shedding what no longer served. There was still a lot to let go of after 13 years of letting go. I was really doing a lot of letting go of what's in my mind. And what I did is I shared everything I had in my mind that was a secret, that I was embarrassed about, anything I was hiding or guarding. And I did that in numerous ways, but ultimately through a 9-part video series that is a total of, I think, 6.5 hours. And at the end of that, there was literally nothing in my mind that anybody else didn't have access to. So this was a practice of making my own mind Creative Commons, of trying to the best of my ability to not own my own mind, which is a pretty unique, interesting concept. And I'm just experimenting with this. Like, it's not like I have a whole lot of, references to go upon with this experiment. But then when I arrived in LA, January 26, 2025, I arrived in Griffith Park, and I had put the word out that I'd be arriving at that time. There was maybe 30 or 40 people waiting there. And part of why they were waiting there is they were going to help me become the human who owns nothing. I gave away all my items to people there. I held up each item and shared, would this be meaningful to you? My sleeping bag or the backpack or my personal hygiene items, whatever they would be. Just one by one over a period of about a half hour, I got to the point where the last thing to take off was the long underwear that I was wearing on this cold, rainy day in Los Angeles. And I sat naked in Griffith Park, covered with a palm frond, owning absolutely no physical possessions, having downsized almost everything online, and even not having the password to any of my digital anything. So there was still some, digital ownership, which is a whole nother realm that we have today. But I gave myself this practice where I had no access to any of those either. And then I lived for the next 3 months in Griffith Park, practicing complete non-ownership.
What I think is interesting here too is that in my own experiences doing things outdoors, I'll give you an example. I was up in the Arctic in the backcountry for like more than a month, and we had to pack everything in. And so obviously you can only carry so much, right? You have to cull everything. Any of these like extra doohickeys, like, oh, that might be nice. It's like, no, everything has to serve multiple purposes. I personally found that when we would have a problem or a challenge we face, you would go, oh, we need this piece of gear, but we don't have that gear. And so what would happen is that we'd have to get creative with what we had. You'd have to be like, well, what if we use this thing that is for this purpose normally, but we could sort of retrofit it to solve this problem? And we were able to. And so for me, it was one of those ahas, like, I probably have a lot of stuff in my house that could be serving multiple purposes. And that sort of influenced me, I would say, to buy a little less, because it gave me this moment where I was like, okay, if I have this problem, my mind automatically goes, buy this thing to solve it. My mind started to go, well, what do I already have that could probably do the same thing without me purchasing something else?
Yes, I'm very glad you brought that up. I think this is a perfect moment to remind people that my message is not for anybody to do just as I do. My message is not for people to live this extreme life just as I do. Hey, if that's what you want to do, I completely support you if you want to radically transform your life and rethink everything. But that's not the point. The point is just what you talked about. It's about critical thinking. It's about problem solving. It's about asking ourselves the question, like, am I living the life that I truly want to? Are my actions in alignment with my beliefs? So my job is to stimulate those thoughts and stimulate those questions, and then start wherever you are. For some people, they might be excited about growing food or foraging or being more involved in the community or creating less waste, or starting an organization that's going to serve, people in living a more sustainable life. I would love to mention that on my website, I have a list of those 100 changes that I make, and that's at robingreenfield.org/100.
Awesome.
So if people are like, I'm looking for some changes, you've got a really helpful resource right there.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the comments. And you talked about how happy this whole process makes you, which I think is sort of culturally counterintuitive, because I think there's a sense people feel that once I have that house or that car or that title, I will be happy. I have a theory about one reason that this makes you happy, but I want to hear in your own words why you think this process makes you happy, and then I'll tell you my theory.
I think the reason that I am as happy as I am is because I'm living in alignment. So I can wake up and I can look at what I'm doing and I can feel content with it. And for me, the way in which I would be unhappy is knowing that my existence is this grand burden on other people. So the alignment for me is that I'm on this path of living in a way that decreases the harm, the unnecessary harm that's being caused, and my actions are quite in alignment. What's your thoughts?
I think one of the reasons, and you can pressure test this, and like you said, I think it's complex, but I think a lot of the things you do, the goals are relatively simple and clear. So, for example, in your foraging experiment and growing your own food, and for listeners who don't know, Robin are you finished with that? You're in the process where you foraged and grew your own food for a while?
Right now I'm in a year of just foraging. No gardens.
Oh, no gardens.
This year was growing and foraging, and that was finished in 2019.
Okay, perfect. So with foraging food, you have this goal. It's very simple. It's very crisp. You know whether you found food or not, right? Like, you either got it or you didn't. The goal is extremely clear. And not to mention, the second part of this is that the time scale is relatively tight. So you have 12 hours and across the day to try and forage your food. So you have a mission every day where you go, okay, you need to find food, and I got 12 hours to do it. At the end of the day, you end the day and you go, I was successful or not? And you just, let off. Whereas I think for a lot of people with modern jobs, the goal is not as clear, right? It's like you work in an office, there's this like kind of big, vague goal the company has, and you're kind of like in this satellite spot where you can't necessarily see, am I moving the dial to this goal? And it's just like vague. Did you ever do the right or wrong thing? I don't know. Not to mention, it's like the work never ends. The time scales are, your 30-year career, and you never have a clear sense of like, did I accomplish the mission? And I think that sort of uncertainty and that lack of clarity behind what am I doing every day? Do my actions have an outcome? Am I going to find out soon? I think that results in a sort of malaise and disconnection in a lot of people. The reason that I had been thinking about this is I did a long through hike in southern Utah last spring. So it was about 45 days. And over that hike, it was, okay, we're going to try and reach this point today. Along the way, we got to find water. We either found water or we didn't find water. We either made it to our point or we didn't. And the time scale was within a day. And so you end the day and you just go, today was a good day. We found water. We made it to our point. Or, you know what? We didn't hit our goal. We didn't find as much water as we want to. But guess what? We get to go at bat tomorrow again and find out if we can do it tomorrow. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. The way that I would put that is like right now we have these terms like eco-anxiety that so many people are living under, these new terms. And so a lot of people have basically placed the weight of the world upon their shoulders. They're trying to save the planet, save humanity, solve climate change. And that's that never ending. There's no accomplishment of a goal. But what I do instead is I work on things that I can have a clear goal for. Like maybe it's to plant 200 community fruit trees this year. And we know that by planting those 200 community fruit trees that we are contributing towards the reduction of, climate change and that we're improving people's quality of life. And we have tangible goals. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see in especially young change makers who are very enthusiastic is they set these huge goals and they base their organizations, their companies, their work around having to accomplish these huge goals before they've even gotten started.
Yeah, and I think that even if you do have a job that has these sort of never-ending goals, everything's unclear, it happens across 30 years, I think that at least provides a framework of what can you do in your time when you aren't working to find things that will give you satisfaction. That could be like you're doing, you're like, I'm going to reduce my impact. Here's the thing I'm going to do today. Let's figure it out. It could be in wellness or fitness where you go, if you want to lose weight, don't go, I want to lose 50 pounds. You go, I'm going to eat an apple instead of a Twix bar today, right? And so by like creating these little micro missions, it's like, yeah, it gives you this clear sense of progress and like, aha, I did it. Let's see if I can do it again tomorrow. All right, we'll start to close out. I got a couple more questions. From your experience of getting rid of all of your things, what were 3 items that you're like, if I had to pick 3 things, those are the only 3 things I could own, what would those 3 things be?
A pot. Definitely. I use my pot a lot. That's a very beneficial thing. It's very multi-purpose. Drinking, cooking, to-go container for food, and so on. It's also a vessel for harvesting rainwater, trapping fish potentially. There's so many things that can be done with a pot. I would say some clothes, and if I could only have one item of clothing, it would probably be like a big warm wool shawl or something that would cover my whole body. And then honestly, I'm going to go with my computer right now because my objective is to reach millions and millions of people and create the ripple that I can in the world. And I can do that without the computer. I've experimented in it. I've not owned a computer. I haven't owned a phone for a long time. And I've tried to own no computer, but I found that it really impacted my ability to reach people. So basically, I'd walk around with a computer covered in a shawl, carrying a pot.
Awesome. All right, final question. For the average person listening to this, where would you tell people to start?
Okay, so I have about 5 key pillars. First, this is not first necessarily, but composting. Everything that can be composted, and then instead of putting it in the garbage can, compost it. You can compost at home, or now there's a lot of places that will actually pick up your compost. Use your body to get around. So biking, walking, skateboarding, whatever.
I love this one. I love this one.
Grow a little bit of food, even if it's just on your balcony and it's, some basil and some tomatoes. Grow a little bit of food.
I think that beyond just the fact that you're getting food and growing it yourself, I think there's a reminder in there that food has to come from somewhere. and it's a long process. And I also think it gets you outside doing something physical, which is awesome.
Yes, absolutely. And so with that, I'm going to add forage a little bit of food. Just learn one plant that's growing in your area. It could be dandelions, or it could be mulberries or blackberries. And, just do a little bit of foraging, connecting to the earth through foraging. And that one note, I guess the next thing I'll say is, I mentioned growing food. Maybe you don't have any space to grow food and you can join a community garden. So that ties in with my next suggestion, which is break free from the very radically independent way of being and do much more in community. Embrace a much more community way of living. And then the last one I'm going to share is look at all the ways you're spending money. Ask if it's really serving you or it's just trapping you in the system, and let go of more and more of the monetized ways of being, which again ties you back to community. Because as you start having a life less based on money, you have a life that's much more based on relationships and skills. So building your skills, building your relationships, this is a true life savings. This is a true retirement fund, is relationships and skills.
I feel like as people start to do the things you just laid out, one, they're doing a lot of sort of universal good. But I think what happens too is you're doing a lot of these things that are really good for our health. You mentioned moving, you mentioned spending more time with people. There's the implicit fact that you're going to be outside. So these are things that like give people a lot of meaning, really associated with long-term health and well-being. And you're also doing this greater good, which is awesome. I love it.
And I'll add to that, come hang out with me.
I love that. I'll take you up on that.
Nice. I'm teaching 7 foraging schools this year from West Coast to East Coast and Midwest. So I do these weekend-long or day-long foraging schools where you can come and learn and be in community. And then I'm doing plant walks and talks in like 30 states this year. So come out and meet more like-minded people. Realize, there are a bunch of people that are into this sort of stuff. And, break free from that isolation and spend more time in community. And coming to my gatherings are a great way to do that.